Eric. We want to call to order the December the 12th, 2019 work session. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda, and I'm entertaining a motion. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and properly second that the agenda will be accepted as printed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed have the same right. The agenda is approved. It is recommended that the school board approve a motion to enter into closed session. Is there a motion for a closed session?
So moved.
Closed meeting for discussion of matters covered under items A1, A2, and A8 of Section 2-2-3711 of the Code of Virginia. The assignment, appointment, performance, disciplining, and release of contract for specific school board employees, the admission and discipline of specific students, and consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice related to personnel. Is there a motion to enter into closed session?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. It is properly moved and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. We're now in closed session.
Members of the board, at this point, the next item on the agenda is to certify that only those items that were identified in the motion convening the closed session were discussed in the closed session. Is there a motion to certify the closed session?
So moved.
It's been moved by Reverend Cooper. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Cock. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. The motion carries. Madam Superintendent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the first item, I'm recommending that the school board approve the readmission of student case number 18-19-S-1 in the name of student, as always, is protected under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act.
Thank you very much. For those that might be listening, this is any of these student cases have been presented to the school board in written material prior to the meeting, and we've had an opportunity to speak with those most familiar with the case. They're all identified by a student case number to protect the identity of the student and their family. Members of the board, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation for the readmission of student case number 18-19-S-1. Is there a motion to adopt the superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Cock. Is there a second? Second. Second by Mr. Pike. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. The student shall be readmitted.
Thank you. The next item is the recommendation that the school board approve the appointment of administrative personnel for the 2019-2020 school year.
Members of the board, we've had an opportunity to review the superintendent's recommendation for this appointment. Is there a motion to adopt the superintendent's recommendation for the appointment as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Augmiron. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Reverend Cooper. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm pleased to announce that the board has just approved Dr. Ingrid Grant as Chief of School Leadership.
Wonderful. Thank you. Oh, is that the one? Oh, wait. No, congratulations. Yay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Superintendent.
All right, thank you. For the next item, we'll have a review of the proposed 2020-2021 school calendar, for which we'll be seeking your approval later this evening. Dr. Teigen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. I am excited to be here to bring you not only feedback from the survey, but to make a recommendation for the school calendar for the 2020-2021 school year. And as a review from last month, we did have a calendar committee that was working on the recommendation for the school calendar, and there were 8 representatives from each magisterial district consisting of teachers, students, parents, clerical staff, administrators, business partners, and community members, as well as a contingency of central office staff. The calendar committee also they established 2 main priorities for 2020-21. Given a post-Labor Day start had already been decided, their recommendations beyond anything related to start date was to honor the most holiest of days in the Christian, Hindu, Jewish, and Muslim religions, and also to make sure that we provided additional time for professional learning for our teachers and to make sure that they were full days. In addition, we had 3 community input sessions held on October 30th at Wilder Middle School, November 5th at Newbridge Learning Center, and November 6th at Pocahontas Middle School. And at the November 14th work session, 2 calendar options were shared, and feedback from parents and staff was sought through a survey that was online through December 1st. There were over 9,000 responses to the survey, which I think is a record for us. And while not necessarily a scientific method for determining outcomes, 83% indicated a preference for version B of the calendars. There were over 2,200 comments related to the different calendars. 270 were related to the version A, and over 1,700 were related to version B. There was just a limited number of options that were something other than specifically for one option or the other. And highlights of the feedback are shown in these next few slides with the end count or number of responses in parentheses. Far more positive comments were made in support of the 2-week winter break. That was by far the most common responses related to that. There were comments related to the inclusion of other holidays with support for that, as well as spreading days off throughout the school year. And even for version B, there was support for the post-Labor Day start. Of course, we know both versions were post-Labor Day starts. And then also in version A, there was support for that mini fall break, November 2nd and 3rd, making a 4-day weekend at encompassing Election Day. In addition to some of the positive feedback, there were also things that the community shared and our staff shared that they don't particularly care for. Some of them did not care for the inclusion of other holidays on our calendar. They weren't particularly positive about ending the school year so late in June, but we know when we have a post-Labor Day start and Labor Day as late as it can be, that requires a later end date in June. Some of them did not appreciate having days off throughout the year, and we understand the need from a staff perspective as far as looking for professional development opportunities versus parents who work outside of education, maybe seeing that as problematic with child care. And there was feedback as well about the late start date of winter break on version A being December 23rd. And then some suggestions that were related to versions A and B were definitely, we've heard before, fewer half-days, fewer or no half-days. Some wanted to see a pre-Labor Day start. They wanted to have a full day for parent-teacher-student conferences, recognition for our federal holidays, recognition for Christmas, and quite honestly, that was an oversight on my part that on the calendar, Christmas was not designated as such on December 25th, and that will be rectified in the final version. Additional clerical days for teachers. In addition to professional learning, it's a combination of needing professional learning as well as time to work with the professional development they're getting to implement that in their plans for school. And so they need a balance of time to be able to handle all of the duties of the work. And then there was definitely some support for a full week off at Thanksgiving, which we know one of our other school divisions in the region did this past year. The recommendation, based on the feedback, is that for adoption this evening would be version B, a post-Labor Day start, with the first day of school being on Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. And other highlights of this calendar include 4 professional learning and/or clerical days for teacher. And those dates would be September 28th, which would be Yom Kippur, November 3rd, which is Election Day at the end of the 9 weeks, November 13th for the observance of Diwali, May 13th for Eid al-Fitr. And then there would be 5 early release days for students. January 29th would be the end of the semester, February 15th for President's Day, March 12th dedicated for either professional learning or clerical, April 2nd, end of the third 9 weeks, June 18th, the end of the fourth 9 weeks. There are also 8 hours built in for parent-teacher conferences for 2 evenings, and there is another 8 hours built in where teachers can complete the required online training modules beginning in July. And so they have opportunity of when to do those, but the time is included. Thanksgiving break would be November 25th through 27th. Winter break would be December 21st through January 1st, with a return to school on January 4th. Spring break remains the first full week in April, as we've done the last 3 years within our region. So that would make spring break April 5th through 9th. And the last day of teachers has been changed to coincide with the last day for students on June 18th. And I am happy to try to address any questions or concerns you may have.
Thank you very much. Members of the board, are there questions, concerns, comments? Go ahead, Ms. Go ahead, Ms.
I
Ogden.
do just have a couple of real quick.
Yes, ma'am.
I really like the idea of recognizing the major religious holidays of our community. We're a tremendously diverse community these days, and Henrico didn't used to be 50 years ago, but we are now. So I think, this shows us keeping up with the needs of our community, which is so important. We did receive a lot of emails on just the focus on community, and there are some people who are in favor of it, as you noted, and others who were not. There were a couple of emails, though, that I found kind of interesting, and I'm so glad that you said you're going to note Christmas on here, because there was community outreach. If you're
Yes.
going to go this way, which I think we should, let's go this way completely. And so I think noting the different holidays is great. The one I noticed is not on there, though, is Easter. So if you're going to put Christmas, to me, I think you should put Easter. That's just my opinion. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but spring break does include, and I just looked up, April 4th is Easter. So I think maybe it should be noted on there since we're out of school then. And that would cover, I think, all of the major, I don't know if your plans to do that, but.
And I will say that focus was on making sure we could honor the highest holy day in each of the religions. And then the question that, as a committee, that was a concern is where do we stop? As far as how many per religion, and how do we provide that balance? And the thought was that Christmas would be considered the highest day, holy day. And that traditionally, every year, Easter is always on Sunday, so we wouldn't have school. Spring break does not always go alongside Easter, though, with that first week, full week in Easter, first week in April, regional focus on spring
Right.
break. It does not always align with Easter. It
No, I
does this
understand that,
year,
but,
this particular year.
I think most years, spring break, covers Easter somewhere. Personally, I'd like to see it noted on the calendar, especially since we are not in school. It's a half a day on Good Friday, and then we're closed on Easter. That's my opinion. I'd like to know what anybody else thinks.
Mr.
but-
Chairman?
Yes, Mrs. Cox.
I think that Mrs. Ogburn raises a very good point. I had citizens that asked me about that as well. And yes, Easter is always on a Sunday. But one of the first things that parents do, and myself, when I had kids in school, is I have to look up to see when Easter is and when I have our school calendar. And I have to say, I do disagree. I don't believe that Christmas is the holiest of all days. I think that Easter is the holiest of all days, and I think some Christians will have that conversation. So if we're going to include Christmas, we most definitely should just have Easter listed on there as well, as a convenience for our parents that are of that faith.
And we had that same conversation about.
I really do.
Anyone else?
I third it.
Okay.
What's that?
Mr. Pike?
Bill, what do you think?
Thank you and everyone that was a part of working through this. And I was amazed at the number of comments that I looked at and read through that you provided for us to review. I just hope when we look down the road that I sincerely hope that we can position ourselves to be able to start before Labor Day at some point. I think that's just really critical. When I look at June 18th as the last day of school, in my old brain, I'd have a hard time sitting in a classroom that long. So as we look down the road, I hope that we can find a way to diplomatically get us starting before Labor Day. I think that's really important for a lot of different reasons. But thank you and everyone that was a part of working on this. I know it was very, very difficult.
Thank you, Mr.
It was
Pike.
exciting work, actually.
Any other, we spoke on anything else? Anything? Okay, and so everybody has what they need to make a decision tonight? Okay, good. I will just offer a few comments. First, I want to piggyback on what Mr. Pike said as you consider it next year. The position we find ourselves in with the ability and the authority to begin before Labor Day was, although it came somewhat easily in the end, was a hard-fought victory over many years where we took some lumps along the way for trying to be out front with that. So, and for all of those reasons that we explained why it was important to the division, I think they still exist. So I hope that that will be something that will be given strong consideration. And if you think you got a lot of comments this year, wait till that comes back up. Beyond that, I would just say that there was some comments about recognizing some of the other federal holidays, and Veterans Day is one that came up quite often. And I believe a couple of people I spoke to, I said, we do recognize Veterans Day, and we actually do a tremendous job of recognizing Veterans Day, bringing veterans into buildings and doing programs and so forth. And so I think while it's not a holiday, it certainly is a day of recognition, and I think we should continue to do that and maybe just share it more as we go forward. A lot of the folks that made that point do not have children in the school system, and so they would not be aware of that. Let's see here. I'm very pleased to see that we've found a way to recognize the other major religions. Some of the remarks against it, it almost feels like it takes a special kind of unhappiness to be unhappy about in finding a way to honor what is dear to other people. So I hope that those feelings of unhappiness will go away as time goes on and sees that there's no harm whatsoever in being kind to people. And my only consideration with Easter, I'm really ambivalent perhaps about whether it should be included or not, is because doesn't tie with any days of school, being out of school, that the misunderstanding could be that it somehow is now tied. Because this particular year, it does fall. But I can recall years when it didn't. And as a matter of fact, we moved spring break over a number of years. And so now it won't. So I know it will be convenient to see there, but it's going to be something that we'll have to explain to people that, yeah, it is on that Sunday and we're off the week after, just by including it. So, but the calendar's always an interesting event, and it gets a lot of excitement down in New Kent right now. They had initially decided to start before Labor Day. I think that they've gotten a lot of pushback, so they've kind of reopened that discussion. So I think we ought to kind of look over their shoulder and see how they're dealing with it as well. Might as well take advantage of that, them breaking ground for us. So, but thank you. So we'll make our decision on it tonight. Yes,
Right.
Mrs.
I just want to add one more thing. As we look to the next year, and we'll obviously have to take this up a little bit later, but I'm wondering, are we in communication? I assume we are, with the other school districts. Do we have a sense whether Chesterfield, Hanover, they're leaning towards the next
For
year?
21, 22?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I think there is support for that, and we are working collaboratively as a region, and that has been consistent. We're all continuing our calendar work. I know Hanover and Henrico are in right after this, we start in January, we have another meeting,
Right.
because it's so important if we're going to do a pre-Labor Day start that we communicate early with our families. So I would anticipate, sometime maybe March, coming back with a calendar for 21, 22, so that if that was the recommendation, there'd be plenty of time for people to make adjustments in their personal
Because I think Mr. Montgomery
plans.
makes an excellent point. We lobbied hard for this. And there are going to be some people at the General Assembly that go, well, wait a minute, you got what you asked for, what are you waiting for? And, I mean, I understand waiting this time, but I think the time has come. And, our AP classes and all the other reasons that we've been saying for years, I think it gives our teachers that much more time to plan if we go ahead and say it. So I would hope that maybe by March, we have a recommendation from that committee to move ahead with it. So if you could keep us posted, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would follow up by suggesting, because it's such a change in what we've done, that you get, that your board weigh in early. So that the committee knows, that's the direction that the schools division wants to go. And then you can come back and do the final approval of the days and so forth, but get an early decision on that. So.
Right.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe you're still up, though.
I think
No, I'm wrong about
Noel
that.
is coming
Yeah.
up. Yep, thank you. For the next item, we'll provide a review of the 2018-2019 discipline data. And Noel is here to do that.
All right. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Dr. Cashwell, it's time for the annual discipline update, and this year we will cover the supports and interventions of the Student Support and Disciplinary Review Office. For the agenda, we will start with the out-of-school suspension data, expulsions, and then the supports and interventions of SSDRO, and end with next steps. As you see here, over the 6-year period from the 13-14 school year until the 18-19 school year, there's been a significant decline in out-of-school suspensions. But as you look at the numbers through each year, there's been an ebb and flow with the out-of-school suspensions. That same data is presented here in the bar graph, where you can see the rise and fall. There was a significant drop from the 13-14 school year to the 14-15 school year. If we look deeper at our out-of-school suspension numbers from 18-19 to 18-19 school year, out-of-school suspensions, we had 94% of our students have 0 out-of-school suspensions. We had 3.7% with at least 1 out-of-school suspension, and 2.3% with 2 or more out-of-school suspensions. And those numbers are strong and impressive as you compare them with our neighboring divisions. But if we look closer at that 2.3% with 2 or more out-of-school suspensions, we see that 81.16% are African-American students, 14.3% Caucasian, 4.48% other. So on the surface, we are reducing our out-of-school suspensions. However, that gap remains, which is a focus that we make to make sure we are going to reduce that disparity. If we ask who are the 2%, for the 17-18 school year, you see there was 80.9% African-American, 39% students with disabilities, 72 male, 27 female, and 77.5 students of low socioeconomic status. Moving over to the 18-19 school year, you see the numbers rose slightly for African-Americans, decline for students with disabilities, decline slightly for our male students, a slight rise in female, but noticeable decline with our students of low socioeconomic status. If we move on to our expulsions, we see from 14-15 to the 15-16 school year, there was a decline in our expulsions, a significant decline from 15-16 to the 16-17 school year, where it leveled off for 17-18 with 6 students who were expelled. In the 17-18 school year, I had 72 recommendations for expulsion hearings. Of the 72 hearings, 7 were brought forward to the board for a vote. Of the 7 that were brought forward, 6 were expelled. And there's an asterisk beside expelled because none of the 6 were truly expelled. Each one of the students were provided an education at one of our alternative sites. So as expulsions go, as far as not receiving services, none of them had received a true expulsion. And of the 6 for 17-18, 1 was a battery assault, 2 were drug-related, 2 were sexual behaviors, and 1 weapon. Before we moved to the 18-19 school year, I would say that we had an active start to our 18-19 school year. In that year, we had 100 expulsion hearings. Of the 100, 26 came forward to the board. Of that 26, 23 received expulsion. And I must note here that most of the 16 expulsions that you can see in that year, 16 were battery assault. If you recall from the previous year, only 1 came forward for battery assault. And I have to note here that most of the 16 who came forward for expulsions for battery assault came from 1 or 2 incidents that happened at the beginning of the school year, rather large incidents, where there were upwards of 20 or 30 students involved. And we see to combat that, we want to push the following supports and interventions from the Student Support and Disciplinary Review Office. We'll start with our K12 intervention, and we start with our mentoring program, which is the Henrico Heroes. This is a mentoring program for our students who are either not on track for on-time graduation or fail to regularly meet our behavioral or academic expectations. And as the saying goes, if you mentor 1 child, you will change 2 lives forever. Our Henrico Heroes seeks to expose students to our post-secondary options and, more importantly, expand their thinking and their opportunities. Research states that when we have mentoring, it improves student attendance, it improves their overall academic performance as well as their behaviors. Research also suggests that we use the following indicators when we identify students to be a mentee. Those students who are attending school less than 80% of the time, students who are failing either English or math, and a greater than average number of discipline referrals. I'm happy to report some of our 18-19 data for our students in Henrico Heroes. We served over 450 students. The average mentee attendance rate was 87%. There was a 40% reduction in our discipline referrals for those students, and both English and math, the passing for the course was 80%. New to the SSDRO this year was restorative practices. And restorative practices responsible for building healthy communities through the development of explicit statewide, school-wide norms, expectations, and procedures. As we know, restorative practices build capacity within our schools to proactively address any unacceptable student behavior, because the bottom line, we want to change unacceptable behavior, not punish or suspend a student. Restorative practices move our schools from the traditional punitive approach regarding inappropriate student behavior to a more disciplined and preventative approach that promotes accountability. And I cannot stress enough just how much we want to change that behavior versus putting a student out of school. Our goals for 1920 when it comes to restorative practices: continue the supports of professional development for staff trained last year. Goal 2 for the spring or the summer is to make sure we have all of our teams trained in restorative practices, our principals, deans of students, counselors, et cetera. We will focus on reentry circles, and that's especially important for those students who are coming back to the comprehensive setting from an alternative setting. We have coordinators of behavior support. We have 2 secondary coordinators of behavior support, but thanks to you, we now have an elementary coordinator of behavior support whose sole responsibility is to work with our elementary schools in the areas of assisting our administrators to maintaining a safe and orderly learning environment that is conducive to instruction. Our coordinators also support, monitor, and build relationships with our students, those students who are either transitioning from the comprehensive setting to an alternative setting or vice versa. And we found that the coordinators of behavior support are equally or more valuable for those students who are coming back from the alternative setting so they don't get there. We want a seamless transition for them to return to their school. Our coordinators also focus on supporting and providing feedback to school administrators and the behavior support staff, as well as coordinating and monitor our students as it relates to our district-wide efforts to reduce discipline disparity and improve our academic achievement. And I couldn't agree more with this quote by Sagai and Horner when he says, behavior and academics are two sides of the same coin. We need to be better understanding of how the two are connected, because they absolutely are connected. Additional supports we have in the areas of our deans of students. We have 13 deans of students at 11 of our schools. These individuals provide support for students in implementing evidence-based practices, strategies, and tools to reduce that unacceptable student behavior. Our deans provide positive behavior supports based on the students' needs, the classroom environment, and as well as the climate of the school. And perhaps the most important role of the dean is to build a rapport with students and staff in order to assist with proactive and preventative measures regarding student discipline. Our deans provide support on the tiered system. For example, Tier 1 is campus-wide support. This reaches roughly 80% of our students. This is done through de-escalation practices, restorative practices, as well as mediation, whether it's student-to-student mediation or student-teacher mediation. We want to repair any harm done at that level. At Tier 2, small groups is about 15% of the school's population. And at Tier 3, this is the individual support or the individual caseload our deans have, and this reaches roughly 5% of our student body. We have Reset, and Reset is not a new program, but it's designed to transform our in-school suspension programs from the sit-down, do your work, be quiet environment to a more character-focused environment using restorative practices, character education, self-regulation skills. Reset is also designed to structured in a manner that students will maintain their academic requirements as well as receive behavior management support to interventions. Again, changing that unwanted behavior. And Reset is at all of our secondary schools currently. It also creates an environment that assists students in developing the necessary skills to improve their academic and behavioral performance. Again, the two sides of the same coin. Our Reset facilitators assist students in acknowledging their unacceptable behavior and teaches them strategies to proactively manage their future actions. It's worth noting that most of our Reset facilitators have been fully trained in restorative practices and all have received professional development in character ed, mindfulness, conflict resolutions, as well as de-escalation strategies. And some of the feedback from our students regarding Reset. And I can learn about my mistakes and how to do the right thing the next time. And I particularly love the second one. I love being heard because it's very important for our students to be heard, as well as I'm doing my work in a quiet and nurturing environment. Some feedback from our administrators. Our Reset facilitator does whatever is necessary to help our students succeed, and Reset is now very structured and organized. Similar to Reset is E-Reset, and the E for elementary. We currently, this is in its second year, and it's at 5 of our elementary schools: Donahoe, Fair Oaks, Ratcliffe, Montrose, and Glenlee. This program operates on a Tier 2 and 3 behavior support with students who do not consistently meet the behavioral expectations. This is done by using a proactive approach to discipline. They have their own specific curriculum called Character First Education. And our facilitators conduct weekly discussions and restorative circles, which are designed to set the tone for the week. Another method to reduce out-of-school suspensions and to change that unwanted behavior is something we call intervention-focused procedures. And what that is, if students who have middle-of-the-road minor code violations and they have not changed their behavior, despite the supports and interventions, they still can get referred to our office for a hearing. But before they get referred to the hearing, there has to be 2 face-to-face conferences with the family, the student, as well as school personnel. That first conference is held after 3 to 5 non-attendance related office referrals. And this is 3 to 5, and I stress to administrators that 3 to 5 is not in stone. I would not expect you to wait till your student fights 5 times before you have that first face-to-face meeting. This is more along the lines of D codes, disrespect, defiance, et cetera. D codes are the most objective codes in any code of student conduct and the code mostly used when it comes to disparity. So the first face-to-face meeting will be held by the associate principal or the assistant principal with the following school personnel. The goal of that first meeting is to discuss the need for supports and/or look at the effectiveness of those supports already in place. We want to develop a behavior intervention plan or a behavior support plan for our students, engage the family to seek input on what we can do collectively to improve behavior. And it's important that we engage the family because we want them to be part of the solution, not coming from the top down saying this is what you should do with your student. We want their input. In this regard, I anticipate working closely with Ms. Cole Johnson and the Family and Community Engagement Department to make sure that we are supporting our students as they need it. And lastly here, we'll continue to partner with the family to curb the possibility of future unwanted behavior. Now, if the first face-to-face conference works and the behaviors change, that's our goal. That's what we want to do. But in the event it does not, then we have the second face-to-face conference, and this is headed by the principal after 2 or 3 additional non-attendance related referrals. Again, that 2 to 3 is not in stone. The purpose of that meeting would be to identify and discuss those interventions and supports already in place and collaborate on the need for more, revise the BIP for the BSP, and place the student on a behavior agreement. Now, as we move to next steps, some of these next steps I'm sure will sound familiar to you as we are no longer working in isolation, but we're collaboratively working with other departments to make sure that we are reaching our students from every angle. So the first next steps, we would continue to, with our school-based supports and interventions, to change that unacceptable behavior, review and revise our discipline policies, work with other departments in areas of equity, bias, and social emotional learning, and to collaborate with other departments to better align the work and coordinate our supports. In addition, we'll emphasize the importance of culturally responsive thinking and teaching practices, increase training for effective use of restorative practices in our school, and examine the need for more coordinated alternative programs to include a standalone alternative school. And at this point, I will be glad to answer any questions about this and any suggestions as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Noel. Are there questions, comments? We'll start on the left, we usually do. But we can start with Mrs. Ogburn if she's ready. Okay.
I want a couple of things. One of the things that, popped up while you were talking is about we don't have true expulsions. So if we could talk about that for just a minute. I know we have to report expulsions to the state. Are we doing that differently now?
Well, they're still being reported as expulsions, but the definition of expulsion is 365 with no services.
Right.
But we have provided every one of our students with services. So the question begs, is it a true expulsion? If there was something that would come from the state saying that if they're provided services, is it an expulsion? Because what we typically do when we have a closed session, we end the suspension and place the student at an alternative site for 365.
Right.
So if you end the suspension and place them at an alternative site, is it a true expulsion?
Yeah, and if I might, Mrs. Ogburn, I think you raise a great point, and it's one that I've asked for a bit of clarification at the state level as well, because given that we are providing an alternative setting, I'm not sure it meets the definition of an expulsion when we report it for our discipline data purposes. So that's something we're going to investigate further because
Yes.
I agree.
Well,
that
and
is.
we have talked about this before, and it was sort of a gray area. It makes me wonder if we don't get an appropriate answer from the DOE or a clarification or whatever, if we might seek different avenues, I mean, through the General Assembly, something having some definition.
Yep, some clarity.
That, for our reporting purposes, because a couple years ago, this would have made a big difference.
Right.
And, I mean, we're, obviously, our numbers are way down. But I did want to ask you, though, just from what you're hearing from the staff, because obviously 6 expulsions that's a wonderful goal. We have drastically reduced our expulsions, which, you know, we should do. Kids need to be in school in
Right.
order to learn, and they're in the right place. But is our staff feeling supported? That's the thing. We've heard this before, where, you know, there's two sides to this coin. I mean, the kids are back in the classroom, but do they, one, feel like they got away with it, for example? Are we hearing from teachers that they still feel like these students that are in the classroom but had a behavior problem understand that we have high expectations for their behavior and that they haven't gotten away with it? I want to be sure our teachers and staff members feel supported.
One thing I have heard is that what we want to stress is that students, when they do certain things that are against the code that absolutely warrant coming forward, they come forward. If it's a D code offense, we want to put the supports in place first, and then if the student doesn't accept the supports and interventions in place or don't take advantage of the opportunities given, then the student won't come back. But we certainly want to make the suspensions and expulsions a last resort. And I certainly don't
Right,
want to
absolutely.
create the environment where our teachers don't feel supported by the SSDRO. I talk to principals often about every hearing that I have after the family's dismissed. The principal and I, we speak and say, well, what do you think? And how would the teacher feel if the student came back? And if they say this teacher was really shaken, I say, that's fine. I understand. The
Right.
child will be educated, but he doesn't have to be educated here.
Right.
And
Well, and I'm mainly thinking of our out-of-school suspensions and those kids who are going to the reset program, things like that. They're out of the classroom for a while. Want to be sure that when they come back, we're following up with them in some way, making sure our teachers feel like they're supported. And because I know discipline, having been there, discipline is a huge issue for teachers. And just want to, I don't know if there's some way we can put this as part of our yearly survey with teachers, that kind of thing.
Mrs.
So-
Ogburn, if I might, you might recall, we reinstated the annual climate survey last school year, and we did bring forth data, and it was, some of the interesting data points came from both the student, teacher, and parent perspective related to safety and discipline, and sometimes a disconnect where, as far as the level of satisfaction to which those were being handled. And so it's certainly something we have heard from teachers, and that survey did point to that fact. And so it's something we're definitely tuned into. You know, we certainly, with the introduction of things like restorative practices and circles that are meant to restore relationships when trust has been broken or a discipline incident has happened, is that doesn't always have to happen in lieu of or without consequences or discipline. And so making sure that, there's not the unfortunate message in our school that, we're trying to eliminate suspensions or reduce referrals. What we're trying to do is eliminate the behaviors that lead to referral and suspension, and that focus on behavior, and that when instances occur in the classroom and there is a consequence that's necessary, or a referral to the office or beyond that's needed, that those steps can take place, but that to make a difference and change the behaviors in the long run, many of the strategies that were mentioned in the presentation must be present. And I think sometimes when those strategies are introduced, it can be confusing to staff to
Right.
see, are these consequences still there when there's a recurrence of the behavior, when there's simultaneously a focus on changing those behavior patterns. So it's certainly something we have an eye to, and I think we need to continue to work on, and we'll monitor those data points because we want to make sure our teachers feel supported in this process.
And also to get feedback, Ms. Ogburn, I also, each year, when we get ready to update the code of student conduct, I gather information from the building principals on what's the feeling in your school about this code? Should we raise the category level or something like that?
Right.
Yeah.
The only other comment I was going to make is I'm so glad to see, especially as part of the reset program, that this involves the behavior plan aspect of it involves getting the parents involved.
Yes,
And
that's paramount.
that team effort to, okay, we're going to support this kid, moving them in the right direction
Sure.
towards success. And that's what it's all about. And I love having that we're getting the parents
We
in
want,
there
we
as part
want
of
the
that.
families to feel that they're absolutely part of the solution, and they're welcome. Their input is valuable.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Mr. Pike?
Dr. Noel, I have a deep appreciation for the work you do.
Thank you.
I remember sitting in disciplinary review hearings and some that were expulsion hearings, and it is very challenging and difficult work. I guess one of the things I'm looking for is more data in terms of if we're truly being successful with all the different programs that we have that try to correct student behavior. I would just be interested to see what it would be like if we took 10 really, really difficult situations across the system, and we tracked them for a year or 6 months just to see how they're doing academically, how they're doing interacting with peers, how they're interacting with teachers, faculty, and staff, just to try to really zero down and see how successful we're being with all the different things that we have. We have a lot of things in place in terms of helping students with their challenges with behavior. But I'm glad that you included data this year about reading and math. I think that's important. But I'd like to know more about that 20% that are still struggling and what we might be able to do there. But we have the capacity to really get data, and I just would be really curious about how successful we're being in all the different things that we're offering. And I think the second thing that can be overlooked is, and you referred to it indirectly, is I love the fact that you're capable of having conversations with principals after difficult
Yes.
Discipline hearings. But I would encourage us to have those conversations with those teachers that were directly involved, to really get a sense of how they're feeling about those circumstances and situations that they have dealt with. I think one of the quiet things that this profession has to deal with that maybe goes unnoticed is morale. And if you're in a set of circumstances where you're constantly dealing with a youngster who has challenging behaviors, you can get worn out really quick.
Yeah.
And your morale can be a real factor, and you can get to the point to where you're saying, I don't know if I can do this anymore. So there's this is really the heart and soul of the school system and our future, and I think it's a part of how we retain teachers too.
Right.
So I appreciate everything that you and your staff are doing. I know.
Thank you.
I've been there. I know how tough it is. But I think it's something we really have to look more carefully at and really study that data and see how we're doing. But thank you for all that you're doing on a daily basis.
Yes, sir.
I really
Thank you for
appreciate
your
it.
kind words.
Thank you, Mr. Pike. Reverend Cooper?
I echo the comments and accommodations from my peers. I guess the challenge for me is each year when this data is presented and we get this breakdown statistically, and this 2% disproportionately. If you look at 80.9% black, 81.1% black, and then 77.5 low social economic status, 72.5 low social economic status. So the correlation between the two. And so I guess, what can we do to get these numbers, better aligned systematically? Because it's just like the special education report, disproportionately African-American males, as well as students with disability, are affected and impacted the most. And so we see this common thread for data like this when it comes to attendance, academic performance, as well as behavior. And I know how hard you and your staff work. I mean, Mr. Pike has said it so eloquently, but I don't want to just sit here, get numb to these numbers, because these numbers represent people, and these people are our students, but also our future leaders. And so, I don't know what we can do. I'm asking you, what resources additional, what can we do? Because for me personally, when people say, and it's not you, just in general, well, we're aligned with regional, statistics and national averages, that doesn't cut it for me.
doesn't,
Because,
yeah.
because, insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. Why can't we be industry leaders? Why can't we be a division that leads the nation in being able to crack this nut?
Well, I'll say this, Pastor Cooper, as sitting on the state committee, Henrico, we are a leader in the Commonwealth. Do we have work to do? Yes. I think one of the things that we can do to affect those numbers you mentioned is to strengthen the collaboration across our departments. I mentioned in here that work with the family and community engagement. I'm looking forward to working with Ms. Cole Johnson in that regard. Everything for me comes down to relationships. If you have relationships with the family and the family truly values the relationships you have, they will work with us. It's almost like there's, in some instances, still a divide between us and them. I think we have to do a better job at schools, the central office, of making sure our parents feel welcomed. I think once they feel welcome, they will work with us in working with the students. The intervention-focused procedures I mentioned, the reason that we want the family involved is because we want them to give their input on this so that the child hears the same thing at home that they hear in school. And we need to make sure that the child understands this is the expected behavior at school, because expected behavior at home and at school may be different.
Well, I think to your point, we've spoken about this over my years, cultural sensitivity and cultural sensitivity and competence in regards to acceptive normative behavior is not unilateral.
Right.
It differentiates based upon the ethos of an individual's, home or their context. And so I think we need to be conscious of that always,
Right.
In regards to our interpretation and our implementation.
Sure.
Well, okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, that's very good.
Reverend Cooper, if I might, to your
Yes,
point, and
please.
I think Dr. Noel answered quite well and covered a number of the things I would have added to that response, and I'll also add, to your point, I think when we look at these disparities, and I think what you're expressing is a frustration that staff feels as well, that those numbers are not declining fast enough, and there's this
They
urgency.
flatline. I mean,
It's urgency around the work when we know we're talking about individuals and students in our classrooms, and we see them here today, and so that sense of urgency is something that definitely motivates us to make sure that we are evaluating many of the supports that we've put in place to make sure they're effective, so we're not engaging in practices that aren't moving the needle. But I think at the heart of this issue, and while I know some of the movement may be slow, we do know that cultural bias is at the root of much of the issue that we see when we look at disparities like this. And so that's continued to work to do, not just helping staff develop more cultural competency and understand their own biases, but then it becomes the culturally responsive piece. So now what? And how do I respond in the classroom when a variety of situations may occur with students, and really equipping our staff and our not just our teachers, but our administrators to be responsive in that way. And so we recognize that that certainly doesn't happen overnight, but there have been cross-departmental efforts to really focus on the way that we're providing that professional development to our families, and would point to this is the first year we've started required for all employees to participate in basic training related to those basic cultural competencies. So we've certainly got a long way to go, and I just say that, we feel that sense of urgency as well as a staff, and appreciate you keeping that on the forefront.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Noel.
Thank you. Ms. Cox, you have some? Yes.
Well, I concur with the comments that my colleagues have said. Dr. Noel, thank you for your work on this. And through the years, we definitely have seen these numbers change, and we need to continue to see some more work done.
I agree.
My colleagues have laid out some of the major points there with our teacher morale piece and families, and as you point out, the relationships is what is key here. Just so much that we do in schools, but particularly to discipline and success. So I wanted to just talk a minute or hear from you a minute on the Dean of Students piece. I've always was so pleased that we had that, and I know that we've grown it. But could you tell me where we're at now with how many schools have Dean of Students in place? I know some of them have 2, but I wanted to see where we are now.
We have 13 Dean of Students in 11 of our schools. 2 schools have 2, a part-time. Dean of Students in Henrico are slightly different from other divisions. Other divisions, the deans act like I don't want to say a junior assistant principal, but in that regard, handling discipline. Our deans won't handle discipline. We tried to have them work with the students before they have to go to assistant principal. That's, again, where that rapport is so important for them to build a rapport with our students. I know that Ms. Velez and Ms. Armstrong, Ms. Velez is my K12 intervention specialist who's responsible for deans now. They had a meeting today with the deans, and I didn't get a chance to talk to them about it in detail. They said it was a very good meeting. They are doing some wonderful things in our schools, trying to prevent that unwanted behavior. Because we have situations, and Mr. Pike was asking about the data, and we can get you a great deal of qualitative data from our programs. One of the coordinators of behavior support told me a story about one of his students just called him up. And he said, I didn't know who else to call. You know, my mom just died, and I didn't know who to call. I just thought of you. I mean, you can't put a number on that, because that's the heart work of what we do. And that's a relationship. He could have called anybody, but he chose to call Mr. Hargrove because he didn't have anywhere else to go. So that's
Hargrove's wonderful,
important.
by the way.
Yeah, he is. And, but getting back to the deans, we want the deans to have that same relationship with our students, because if a student feels you genuinely care about them, they're less inclined to disrupt, and they're less inclined to disappoint you. But if they have a feeling that you don't care about them, they won't think twice about being disrespectful or disorderly in your classroom.
And you can't bluff them.
They're smart. I've said it a million times.
They know the authenticity.
Right. If you know, some of these students may not blaze a trail academically, but they are far from stupid. Very far from stupid. So if they feel that you are not genuine, they will let you know in some of the most unpleasant ways.
Okay. Are they in secondary schools, or do we have some in elementary schools now too, as needed?
I'm pretty sure they're in our secondary schools. I'm not
They're all in
completely
secondary?
sure. Yeah, secondary.
Okay. And so we've chosen where the need is the greatest?
Yes.
And that's where we've put our resources?
Yes.
Wonderful.
And we also have them at Academy of Virginia Randolph.
I'm sorry?
The Academy of Virginia
Okay,
Randolph,
thank you.
AVR.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Well, very good. I have just a couple of questions or comments. So one is kind of piggybacking on a number of these comments. Is there anywhere in our division where we've seen success that's out of the ordinary, that breaks the mold? In other words, Reverend Cooper said, let's be the leader in the nation. Do we have a school or someone who's doing it, and so that we can figure out what's different, even if it's a little success, and replicate it? I don't know, and you don't have to answer now, but I would suggest that we look to ourselves and see if somebody is making a difference somewhere, if we can find a way to do it. And then the next point would be, as we're going to have a budget hearing tonight, but it's always the budget. You talked to, all of those programs involve a lot of people. And when you're going to, particularly when you get down to the tier 3 support,
Right.
where it's a lot of one-on-one, it's a very people-intensive operation and execution. And so as you build the budget, I hope that we will consider what we need to do to support, because that will not only work on improving the discipline, it'll work on the morale of the teachers as well, because they'll have the support there. So never hesitate to ask for more people, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to do that. On the dean of students, are those all FTEs now?
I think we still have 2 that are part-time.
They're the 2 that double up somewhere?
Right.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then the ERES program down at the elementary level, or ERESET?
E-reset.
Are those FTE programs as well?
I believe they are, because these aren't new positions.
That's correct.
They've already been there. It's just changing the mind shift
Okay.
about the programs.
Okay. So those are all, because it's like, for a while, our deans of students were not full-time.
Right.
And the core of what they're going to do to be successful is relationships.
Right.
And if they're not in the building daily,
They need-
or for the full day, then it's very hard to build the relationship. And the student having that crisis or that issue that needs the support, if that's the person they built the relationship with, and oh gosh, their 4 hours are up for the day, or their 5 hours are up for the day, then we really haven't accomplished much. So even as we begin to add, if we are able to add more people, we should always make an effort to add them as full-time folks. to the greatest degree possible.
And Mr. Montgomery, you reminded me, every first Wednesday of the month, we meet with Henrico Police, bright and early, 7 a.m., with Henrico County, Hanover, City of Richmond, and Chesterfield. And one of the resource officers spoke quite highly of one of our deans and the effect they've had in the school, and bringing down the daily disruptions of a school that may not come to my office, but putting out those little fires because they are able to form that relationship with the students. So again, that's qualitative, but we can even look at quantitative data with that. If we look at the number of incidents that happened in the school before the deans and those that happened afterwards. So again, to Mr. Pike's point, we will take a closer look at that data.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you for that information. We all have the same concerns and want to provide the same support that Reverend Cooper mentioned, because
absolutely.
it concerns us greatly. So I think the answer is whatever you need is a place to come ask for. So
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. And I'd also mention, in addition to the e-reset at elementary, you also may recall the Bliss classrooms being added as well, and some SES teams at the elementary level to help meet some of those behavioral and social emotional needs. So we're continuing to look at data resulting from those programs as well, and we'll look forward to reporting back. All right, for the next items, actually, there are a number of policy revisions that came forth at our last meeting for your review, and we'll bring forth those policies again for your review as we'll be looking for your approval later this evening. So I would say the first one is, and I think Mrs. Gimple will come up should there be any questions about any of the revisions. I was peeking to see it. Now I found that she's there.
Madam Superintendent,
Yes.
I think what may be a way to address these is, as Ms. Gimple comes forward, are there any questions that anyone needs about any of these in order, we
Rather
will
than
take
taking
action
them
tonight.
individually.
I don't know that we need to. We've
Okay.
addressed them and had them, and
I have a
Mr.
question for
Montgomery?
each of them.
of each of them. Well, you'll need to do that over dinner.
Well,
The-
Mr.
yes.
Montgomery, several of them, it was, had to do with our pay change from.
Correct.
Yes, so I think that's a good thing to point out, so that it's just that
Okay.
tweaking of the verbiage.
All right, and if you want to do, are there any, why don't you just go through and tell us, are there any that are other than to address the fact that we're now paying on a,
So things that would be substantive to the content of the policy rather than striking through to modernize them, to match our practices, which is the bulk of what these policies, these policy revisions do. So in some cases, it might have been to reflect our pay cycle. In some cases, it might have been to reflect updated department names, titles, those sorts of things. And Mrs. Gimple, is there anything that's not of that nature here that you want to bring to our attention?
One of them, P205002, Order of Business, it really was modified to reflect the current practice that the board has, so it wasn't really a technical change, but it was a change to reflect the actual
Correct.
order of business, which was a bit outdated. I'm going to walk through. We also have P401-001, and let's see, this was updated. The title, basically a title change, and some new wording that really brought us in compliance with current regulation and policy and state regulation, and VSBA was used as a model for that. Those are really the only two.
thank you. The one, couple to point out, the PrEP program, which I know always gets a lot of attention. This is not a substantive change. It's not
Correct.
changing hours. It's not changing rate or anything of that nature.
Correct.
The other is the Mass Science Innovation Center has been reserved, and that, while that is substantive, the decision behind the decision behind the change and the adjustment to the provisions was one that was made quite some time ago and made by the board.
Correct.
Just so that everybody recognizes that we're not trying to say that's of no substance, but the substance has been dealt with already. Anyone else have any questions, comments, or need any information for making a decision at the board meeting tonight? Well, thank you very much for your hard work and good work on that. And
Thank you.
that's the mark of good staff work, is that we're able to deal with it in this fashion.
Thank you.
So, Madam Superintendent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the next item, the board will receive an update on the redistricting process and will offer an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have at this point. And Mr. Briggs is coming forward to provide that. And maybe Mr. Sorensen. I couldn't tell if he was getting up.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. I'm here to provide a brief update on the redistricting process. We held our fourth set of meetings over the past 2 weeks. Cropper GIS presented the feedback received from the Public Information Session Survey, and the committees discussed the feedback that they received during the sessions. This information is now being used to draft new options, which will be available next week. Transportation also presented on the route planning process and impacts that different boundary adjustments would have on transportation. This is the third round of meetings that representatives from the school transportation have attended. I would like to take a moment to thank Josh Davis and Allison Beverly for their input that they have provided during the process. We will hold our next set of meetings on January 7th and 8th, and we are working on holding a joint committee meeting on January 9th as well. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Members of the board, I'll start on the right this time. How's that to give you, to be fair? So,
I wasn't
I don't have to go to the
expecting
far
that.
right, but I can go to either of my colleagues to the right.
I guess my biggest question is that we need to ensure that the committee, and it's not a question, but we need to ensure that the committee has what they need. And I know we've heard some different frustrations and pieces about that, and I think that we are all of a mindset that we, whatever direction it is that we as a board need to give them, we need to go ahead and do that up front and give them whatever it is that they need. And I was curious as to where we are standing with the middle school addition piece. I know that was brought up during this past week by at least one committee member, and I was curious what information you have to share about that.
Okay. We did share with the secondary committee that we do have a budget request in our CIP with the county. Staff's recommendation is that the addition would go at Hungry Creek.
Okay.
We emphasize that that is a staff recommendation until both boards approve it. The decision is not final. But we will give that information to the committee, and it will be an option, because again, we won't know if it's final until the spring.
Right.
So the committee will work with both the elementary school and the middle school as options. If the funding comes along, they'll be prepared to respond to that with maps.
So to make sure I understand, because I'm a little slow-witted sometimes, so they're going to be coming up with two plans then, one if it's funded, if it's not funded, and moving forward in that way, so that work is continuing?
Correct.
Until we find out whether there's any funding or not?
Right. I can't tell you that every meeting they'll produce two separate sets of maps, but yes, they will be working on an option that should these items be funded in our CIP, that they will have a plan to respond to that funding. Okay. So they won't be starting over once we find out if they're funded or not.
Okay.
They'll be prepared to respond.
And it affects the two plans, since it is an addition at Hungry Creek now, because that's your staff recommendation, not
Correct.
that it's been voted on, but your staff recommendation is that. So then it's going to affect that area, I assume, and not all of the county per se.
That is correct. So we have talked to both committees about that. So both schools would impact a relatively small area of the county.
Okay.
So it's not like they would have to redraw all their maps and all their zones, because where the schools are located, again, we're very confident we can work and just have a minimal impact on those immediate schools.
Okay. And has the committee received the information that they had been asking for about our economic disadvantaged students and such?
They have.
Or areas?
So we put out basic maps in September that included socioeconomic data, and just the transition. We knew that the data would change throughout the process.
Yes, sir.
So at this last meeting, they not only got updated socioeconomic data, but they also received updated enrollment data.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cox. Reverend Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. That was my main question, my first one, the social economic data. Justin, can you expound on the conversations we've had in regards to Monica Mann's role as far as the process, as far as equity and diversity, as far as training, bias training? Are we doing any of that for committee members?
So she has been attending, and she has she's attended the past two meetings, and she has talked to various committee members if they've had questions, and there has not been any formal training per se. However, we are looking into doing something potentially with the joint meeting being held on January 9th.
So, Madam Superintendent, you might want to, so when we put the CIP, when we put the request for proposal, RFP out for this, right? So we just said that we understand that our staff members have room for improvement culturally as far as our division on cultural competency and cultural responsiveness, right? So then volunteers that we have in this process, it would seem to me that we would kind of figure out a way initially to kind of speak to that for the people involved, I would think. I mean, because, you know, you've got people who come from total different worlds that you're asking to not have an implicit bias, you know, in regards to objectivity and openness, and to be able to distill all of the four, you know, cornerstones of this process. And I guess that's I keep raising it because I just, you know, I feel kind of nebulous in regards to how I'm feeling on it.
Well, certainly, I know when Mr. Cropper did the initial orientation and training for the citizen committee members, one of the things he talks about is keeping the goals at the forefront and recognizing that bias comes in a number of ways for the individuals on the committee. You know, we all have our own biases, and recognizing that those shouldn't come into play in the process and how to avoid that. And by taking things back to the goals of what the redistricting is focused on doing. So, I mean, I think he's certainly aware of that, and having done a number of these across the nation, being aware that, you know, we want to make sure that the individuals aren't necessarily just thinking about their own neighborhood or their own community, but thinking about Henrico County schools and the objectives that were outlined. So I know that's been the focus, and the processes that have been in place for the committees to follow have certainly centered around those. And in cases where there have been individuals where their motives have come into question, if you will, by other committee members or the public, I know that conversations have been had with them directly about, again, in participating on this, while you're a citizen, participating on a citizen committee, and we appreciate the service, making sure that they are keeping the goals of the process in mind and focused on those. And in cases where they feel that they're not able to do that, perhaps it's not a match to serve on the committee. So I know that Mr. Cropper has addressed that with individuals. And to the point, you know, making sure that we provide the support as needed as staff to the citizen committee, but also recognizing they are individual citizens volunteering of their time.
Well, I feel better that you're saying that he did broach the subject and had a sense of intentionality in regards to conveying it. And then secondly, if the perception is persons are kind of leaning toward something that benefits them, that's addressed, and as well as Monica's presence there. So that helps as well. And thank you for that. And a quick question, Chris or Justin. So can you just speak to the fact that we do not use census data, or we use enrollment data, because, you know, people are saying we should just wait till the 2020 comes out, and I've discussed we don't use census data, we use enrollment data. So can either of you just speak to that quickly?
You are absolutely correct, Reverend Cooper. We use current enrollment data. Again, we just updated that. We used last year's when we started the process. We just updated the last meeting. We had no reason to use census data.
And so when people say, well, that's more indicative of where the numbers are, what would you say to them in regards to the census compared to enrollment?
I'm sorry.
So they're, go ahead. No.
Why do we use the current enrollment versus census data is what he's,
I just want you to say it so
people
people
are
can hear
asking.
it.
Oh, sure, because the current enrollment data is up to the minute current. If we just completed the process, it says of September 30th, 2019. It is what we use for all of our planning, and it's an official report to the state. It is current data.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Reverend Cooper. How about the folks on our left down here?
Sure. I had the opportunity, I don't know if anybody knows this, to go to the meeting on Monday night, which I found quite illuminating. Saw Monica interacting with people, answering questions. I talked to her about what her role was there, and it was really interesting to hear her input with the committee. She's trying really hard to just be a resource and answer questions and kind of give just this sense of calm, like you're doing a great job. And so I thought she was really there for the right reasons. And she seemed to feel like it was a valuable use of her time to be there as a resource. But I just want to express my gratitude for the hard work you guys are doing. It is the most thankless task, being on the committee, being in your shoes. We've talked about this a lot in the last week. The committee, they sometimes, there was a little give and take on Monday night, and it was interesting to watch their process of how they're doing this, and so I have full respect for what they're doing. I think we can just all be patient. We'll get there. But anyway, thank you, and to the members of the committee. I thanked a few of them Monday night. I didn't go to the elementary committee meeting, but I went to the secondary one, and tough task.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Mr. Pike?
Very quickly, I was there Monday night. I didn't stay for the entire time, but I think the process is interesting, and there's a lot of information to consider from everyone's perspective. And I appreciate y'all's leadership with it, and I appreciate what the committee's doing and what Mr. Cropper's doing as well. And I think, at the end of the day, all that information to look at and to consider, I think we'll get there. It's a tough process, and a lot of things impact it. And I think having Mrs. Manns there is a really good thing to do, and I know that she is good at working with people, and I would encourage us to keep using that as we need it. So, but thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, I would just close by saying this, that the ultimate check on those biases and potential biases will be the board when it comes here. So you just have to remain mindful of that as you make those considerations. And then I'd also, Reverend Cooper and I and the superintendent had a meeting with the chairs and the vice chairs between the governing bodies. And one of the topics of the conversation was the fact that the CIP has a request for middle school expansion and a elementary school in the Fairfield district. And so the folks that were at that meeting representing their board recognize the importance of providing feedback to that early. So I expect that the superintendent and the board will get some feedback earlier than what would be normal in the approval of the CIP, but some indication. And so I believe Mr. Brennan in particular recognized the fact that that would be something that had to be considered earlier rather than in the normal course of things. So I'll just share that. All right, very good. So folks, we have a 5:30 scheduled budget input session. So what I'm going to do is suspend the work session and move into I know we have 3 people signed up to speak on the budget. So I'm going to move to that now. Mr. Sorensen, are you prepared to provide your brief remarks at this time?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right, well, briefly provide your brief remarks.
All right. So thank you, Mr. Montgomery. So as Mr. Montgomery stated, we do want to conduct a public hearing tonight for budget input. Budget input is really important to us as we move through this process. The calendar before you shows that we have had several opportunities for the community so far, because we do, as we develop it, we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of the citizens and expectations of the citizens and our staff and students. So today is December 12th. This will be our second public input session, but it's not the last opportunity for citizens to participate in the process. The superintendent will present her budget to the school board on January 30th. We will have a school board public hearing on February 13th as the school board works through the process. The school board will then send their budget to the county to be included in the Board of Supervisors budget, and the county has their public hearing on April 14th. Again, folks can come out and speak about the county's budget or our budget at that time. The budget is scheduled to be adopted on April 28th by the Board of Supervisors, comes back to our board on May 14th, and of course it will go into effect July 1st for next year.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think it's important to note that since we call ours a financial plan versus a budget, that's because it really is different. It's input to the whole county's budget. So the next item, the item on the agenda now is for the public input session to solicit input on the proposed revisions to the 2020 2021 Annual Financial Plan. Some citizens have signed up in advance with the school board clerk. We will follow that list first. Then we'll allow anyone else who wishes to speak to come to the podium to do so. We ask that each speaker come to the microphone and clearly state your name. I may ask you to spell it if you haven't signed up in advance, and neighborhood or school affiliation. Once you've finished speaking, if you did not sign up in advance, there's a place for you to write your name down and contact information, and it's on a table behind the microphone. To assist you in tracking your time, there's a timekeeping system on the podium. Speakers will have a 4-minute time limit. The light will be green as you begin. The yellow light means that you have 1 minute remaining, and the red light means that your time is up, and we ask that you promptly stop speaking in respect to the others who are here to speak as well. The school board is here tonight to hear from you, the community. Speakers should speak directly to the board and address your comments to the board. We will not be responding to speakers here tonight, but we will carefully consider your comments regarding the annual financial plan, and someone may follow up with staff from staff if you've indicated that you would like that to be done. We appreciate your attendance here this evening and providing your input. Our first speaker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call all 3 speakers and ask that you just come down to the front just to help us move things along. Our first speaker is Angie Gilson. The second speaker is Mary Neary, I beg your pardon. And then our third speaker who signed up is Shelley Donovan. So if Ms. Gilson would come forward and begin, please, and the others can be on deck.
Hi, my name is Angie Gilson, and I'm here on behalf of Freeman High School to advocate for new lighting in our auditorium. My husband and I are both graduates of Freeman, and my son is a graduate of 2016, and my daughter is a senior now. To give you a little history, the discussion of the lighting began for me in 2017 when I met with the principal, Mr. May. Mr. May and now Mr. Marshall have been wonderful advocates for Freeman and elevating this request several times. But we all know that the price tag for an entirely new lighting system is surpassed by the amount of discretionary funding that the principal has allowed. As they have elevated it numerous times, electricians have come out, but there have not been any replacements of any outdated equipment, which I will attempt to explain that the system needs to be replaced in entirety. Needing to understand the system, we had Mr. Doug Noble come out this summer and prepared a report for us. He is a longtime friend of Freeman. He has an MFA in lighting. He is a director of the Auditorium of the University of Mary Washington. He has 30 years in experience, and he is not an electrician, but he acquired estimates from them. He developed a report for us that I have copies here that I will leave with you all to look at later. To borrow his words, the current lighting system at Freeman is comprised of all legacy equipment. So what that means is it's no longer manufactured, nor is it supported by the manufacturers. All of the original wiring is from 1954, and it was not updated at the renovation in 2009. His report is an assessment of the 4 integral parts, and I just am going to go over a very quick and superficial summary, and again, you can refer to this report at your leisure. The distribution center are the raceways that hang over the stage. They are from 1954. They work in conjunction with a bay that assigns the lighting to the dimmers. The bay became obsolete in 1980. Half of the system on the raceways have original 1954 plugs, which mean they have no ground wire, which was required beginning in 1960. The connectors are not secure. The manual winch system to raise and lower them have not been used because it's not properly secured, and the patch bay has connectors that spark and arc when connected. The control system is the actual brains, the control board that works all of the lighting system. It is 25 years old, and it is basically a computer system, if you can imagine trying to do your job with a 25-year-old computer. Basically, when it dies, the entire system will go down. It cannot be replaced because there is nothing that would be compatible to the wiring and the other equipment due to the age of the equipment at Freeman High School. The third part is the power system. It is a dimming system for the house and the stage light. Basically, for our size theater and auditorium, you would have 96 theatrical dimmers. We have 24, but 6 are used for house lighting. And of the 18 remaining, only 16 are working. So consequently, theatrical lighting is used for everyday use in the auditorium, for use of the stage for all the different areas. And the last part is the lighting instruments. Because they're so outdated and so difficult to get, for instance, we bought $600 worth of light bulbs. We had to get them through consignment this past fall. We had to pay exorbitant shipping costs, and a third of the bulbs were broken when we received them. So for our $641, we had $360 in working light bulbs. Mr. Noble's recommendations has guidance with 2 solutions ranging from $25,000 to $223,000. I'm sure there are lots of options in between. I became familiar with this being on the Freeman Theater Guild, which is the booster. We have raised and purchased $14,500 in equipment in the last 3 years, microphones, sound room renovations. Is that it?
Yes.
So in any case, thank you for your time. I'll leave these with you.
Yes, and thank you for that. Ms. Gilson will be followed by Ms. Neary, or Neary, perhaps?
You got it.
Neary?
Yes, thank you.
I beg your pardon. Okay.
No, it's okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Mary Neary. I'm the president of the PTSA at Freeman, and I've been a Freeman parent since 2013, but I've been involved in Henrico County Public Schools since 2004. But my kids are phasing out of HCPS and on to college, but I do want to thank you all for what you've done for our school system. We're lucky that we have such devoted public servants. But I'm here today to advocate for renovations at Freeman. As you know, Freeman was built in 1954. It was renovated in 2009. And in the past decade, some additional and much needed improvements have been made through a variety of funding sources. But additional improvements are needed in many areas, and most especially in the auditorium and the stage. The electrical and lighting system in the auditorium is not just an issue for our wonderful cultural arts programs at Freeman. It's an issue for the whole school. The auditorium is used regularly for PTSA parent programs like the College Funding Coach, student programs, honors assemblies, counseling programs, the Leadership Center open house, the National Honor Society inductions, Rebel Camp for freshmen, and much, much more. In fact, every visitor to Freeman usually starts or ends their visit to the school in the auditorium, and the space is used on weekends for Journey Church as well. To have appropriate lighting and electrical support for these sessions is important, and to have safe lighting and electrical systems is vital. These systems have been limping along, as Ms. Gilson described, but they're a bit of a safety concern at this point for us, and we really hope that these issues can be addressed. Our PTSA was a strong advocate for the Henrico County meals tax, hoping that some of the money could be used every year at Freeman for improvements. And I don't pretend to understand the budgeting process or how funds come from which sources, but I just really hope that the school board will help advocate for us to have funds put aside for Freeman, however that money comes in. And the project has been a long time coming, and we just really, really appreciate your support of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. And Mrs. Donovan? Mrs. Donovan?
Good evening.
And if there's any others who plan to speak, if you'll move up to the front, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Shelley Donovan, and I'm also here to speak on behalf of Freeman High School, in this case, on behalf of the choral boosters and some of the other stakeholders that use the auditorium. You've heard from Angie and from Mary that there are multiple stakeholders, and I guess for me, I want to add a little bit more of the emotional side, because the auditorium has been really, really important for our family. It has been, Freeman High as a whole has been just excelled and exceeded my expectations for, as a parent. You always hope that your kids find a safe place, that they are exceeding and they are excelling and they have a place to really shine. And I will say that my son's now going through college applications, and I asked him, I said, what do you want me to say tonight? Because he wanted to be here, but he's working on his college essay tonight, and we all know there's deadlines. So he said, well, Mom, there's always the funny stories that you can mention about the lights that don't really, they're so hot that we've had people say, I want my tickets back. I'm not going to pay because I'm burning up. I can't stay in this auditorium. So he's like, there's some embarrassing stories where the lights are so strong, but yet there's holes and you can't see people in certain places up on the stage. And he said, I go to all these other schools, the newer ones, the renovated ones, and he said, it's a little embarrassing. He said, those schools are amazing, the investment that has gone into things like the lighting and the electrical. So he said, I've been to Deep Run, I've been to Godwin, we've been to all the Hanover schools. He said, they really have done a great job. He said, I really want to see that as a legacy for our school. So as part of his college essay, I was reading it the other day, and one of it is, what is one of your proudest moments in your 4 years in high school that you want to highlight? And he's an Eagle Scout as well. I expected that was what he was going to say, and he didn't. He said, it is the performing arts. He said, it was my time in performing arts and in chorus, because the individuality, the diversity of the people around me, and the fact that it gave me a community that I was involved in all 4 years, where my time was spent there. And the winter chorus is coming up next week. If any of you can attend, it would be wonderful for you to visit, because it's 17th, evening of the 17th. And one of the best parts of it is we have alum that come back from other colleges. They've been long gone. They come back for the evening, and at the ending, at the wrap-up, at the end of the chorus, the alum all go up on stage together. And it is a fun time, and it is a legacy that has been year over year, one right after the other, that the alums are excited to come back and still build that legacy that has been built over the years at Freeman. So thank you all. Hopefully you all can help us.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you to the three folks who spoke and for your comments. Are there others? Yes, please come forward. And this, again, is regarding the budget, so please bring your comments. Always good to see you.
Thank you. It's always good to be here with y'all. I'm Jennifer Andrews, Henrico resident and teacher. And regarding the budget, the staff appreciates the pay increase that we got last year and the pay compression fix, but I would encourage you, if possible, to find continued money for raises this year. And I know with the Unified Pay Plan, your hands are tied in terms of wanting to give staff a raise, but I encourage you to work with the Board of Supervisors to make that happen. Additionally, in terms of pay, substitutes are not always available at some places, and with the employment market the way it is, I wonder if we have good availability of subs based upon what we're paying. And we've talked with Dr. Cashwell about that. And so it's not just pay as a problem of getting staffing for subs. There's other issues involved, and I know you're working on it, but if a pay increase for subs would be in the works, I would suggest that as well. And then the other pay issue would be, this year we brought more part-time instructional assistants into full-time instructional assistants. And if we could continue along that road, that would be great. As a special education teacher, I work with instructional assistants every day. The people that work for this school system who are instructional assistants give so much of their time and effort, and for quite a small compensation compared to what effort they put out. So those are just the three things, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much for bringing that forward. We appreciate you in the Henrico Education Association that you bring forward each time and share with us, and not just your support, but also your advocacy. So we really appreciate that. Are there others who are here to speak tonight at the budget hearing? It does not appear to be so. So at this point, we'll move back to our work session, and I believe the next item was under operations.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 items under operations. The information, of course, was provided for your review in board docs. This will be an opportunity to answer any questions you may have. Susan Moore and Lenny Pritchard are coming forth for any questions. I'll read each item, and then later this evening we'll be seeking your approval. The first item is related to the contract to Mosley Architects in the amount of $1,359,636 for the architectural and engineering services associated with the design of the new ACE Center on the Glen Allen High School property.
Members of the board, are there questions or comments regarding that, other than we're glad to see it moving forward? Very much so.
I had a quick
Yes,
question.
please, Mrs. Scott.
What's the time frame for having it come back and the bidding process and such?
We would look at being able to bid next summer, probably late summer, early fall of next year for bidding.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? I know generally this is, this is the A&E portion of it, but, and we haven't awarded bids, so we don't know what's going to come in, but about 1.3 million is, it seems a little low compared to some of the other projects that we had. Can you explain how that is the case?
Yes, sir. What we are doing on this, we had 1.5 million allotted for the design under this fiscal year.
Correct.
So what we have done is we are contracting only the design services. The proposal that was attached in the school board documents shows the additional services, which includes construction administration and the later project services. We have numbers for those. We're just not awarding that part of the contract at this time.
Just want to make sure that's on the matter of the conversation. Anyone else? Very good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next.
All right, the next item relates to an amendment, the fifth amendment to be exact, which is an extension to the lease agreement with the Liberty Property Limited Partnership for the surplus warehouse located at 4323 Carolina Avenue.
Board members, any questions? I just note that I support all amendments.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Mr. Pike.
We still have that warehouse right across the street back here by the Eastern Government Center?
Yes.
Yes, and what do we house there? What do we store there?
The predominant space of that warehouse goes towards the Christmas Mother.
Right.
The remaining area of the warehouse is our school book storage, so books that are not out of adoption,
Right.
but not in current use, we have in that warehouse. We also have lockers, if you will, or storage areas for the different specialists so that they have a place that they can keep their instructional components and gear.
So it hadn't changed a lot since I was in there?
No, sir.
Okay. So what do we store on Carolina Avenue?
Carolina Avenue is all surplus, as well as tables and chairs. We share Carolina Avenue with the general government side. It's about a 50-50 split, not quite. I think they have about 51%. We have about 49%. So that space is, one side is all of the stuff that comes over from general government. The other side is ours. We also have our specialty adaptive furniture that we store in that area because we have to pull that out
Right.
and take it around to different locations,
Right.
particularly during the summer, and then bring it back in for storage. And we do keep a complement of tables and chairs which the schools can use so they don't have to try and
Okay.
manage tables and
So-
chairs on their own.
So it's basically stuff that's in good shape. It's not junky stuff that could be heaved.
The stuff that can be heaved by procurement guidelines is heaved. We do keep a 30-yard container over there to take care of that stuff. Metal products are taken to recycling.
Okay.
And then everything else goes through the proper procurement process, whether it be an auction, the regular auctions they have through Henrico County, or it goes on Gov Deals. And
Okay.
we attempt to sell it through Gov Deals.
So I'm hoping that we're sharing the cost with general government.
Yes, sir, we are.
Oh, that's refreshing. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm glad to know that we've defined heaved. So Mr. Anderson, I know. Mr. Anderson down there making a note of include that in our contracts going forward. So very good.
It's just very timely because I've had conversations
Yes.
this week
About heaving items.
how complicated that is.
Yes, very good.
Indeed.
All right, and then the next item?
All right, well, the next and the final item under operations is in regard to the contract for which we'll be seeking your approval this evening to Sun Tribe Solar LLC for the solar power purchase agreement, which will provide a solar power system to the new Tucker High School, the new Highland Springs High School, and the new Holiday Elementary School expansion. And as noted in the information you received, this agreement will also serve as an annual contract for future identified facilities.
Wonderful. Are there any questions or comments, school board members? Mr. Pike, you're
Yes, sir.
hitting the
Just-
button there?
Yeah, real quick. Are these companies local by chance? Any of these solar companies that we're working with?
Sun Tribe is in Virginia. I don't think they are in Richmond. I would have to look back at the proposal to verify that.
But they've got a reasonable track record working with school
Yes,
systems?
sir. They also got the first contract that the county put out for solar PPA,
Okay.
which covered Libby Mill Library and
That's good. That's
Health
fine.
Center.
the new Fairfield Library. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Very good. Anyone else? Other than just to be excited that it's kind of interesting that almost 12 years ago, I think, we started talking about that we should do these sorts of things, and the county and the schools together have come a long way, so it's good to see that we'll have that. All right, thank you. Anyone need anything else? These will be items that we will consider and vote tonight. All right, there doesn't appear to be any. Madam Superintendent, I believe that concludes your portion
Yes,
of the business.
that concludes items from the superintendent.
Okay, you did it without losing your voice, so that's wonderful, yeah. Next would be any unfinished business by the board. Any new business by the board? Yes, Mr. Pike.
Just real quick, Mr. Montgomery and the board, I think you're going to be hearing from the Health Advisory Committee sometime in the near future, probably February. I met with Dr. Avula last week, and I know he's been doing a lot of interviewing, conversations with people, and so I think they'll probably be on your work meeting, your work agenda for February. But he's doing a lot of good things.
Wonderful.
So
Thank you for
that's-
sharing that, and thank you for your work with that committee. So, others? I would only share, just for the group will know, we've Code RVA, and as part of its growth, now has its second director who serves as the principal of that organization. So, we just selected that person, and we're very excited about it, and that school continues to do great things for us. So, there not being anything further, that concludes this meeting. Our next meeting will be here in just a few minutes at 6:30. We will also meet tomorrow at 7:30 for the legislative breakfast at Hermitage High School, and then on January 16th, the work session is scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. subject to change. There being no further business, we are adjourned.